The meeting hall stretched out like a giant bowl made of gleaming metal and crystal. Thousands of seats filled the curved walls, each one built for a different type of alien body. Some seats were tiny for creatures no bigger than a cat. Others were huge enough to hold beings the size of elephants. The air hummed with different sounds as hundreds of alien species talked, clicked, buzzed, and made noises that human ears could barely understand. Lieutenant Jake Morrison shifted in his uncomfortable chair. The human section was small, just 20 seats in a corner that felt forgotten. Next to him, Ambassador Lisa Carter checked her notes one more time. She looked nervous, and Jake could not blame her. Today was not going to be a good day for humanity. The lights dimmed, and a tall figure walked to the center of the hall. Zethkar looked like a walking piece of blue crystal, with light flowing through his body like water. He was from the Andromedan Collective, one of the smartest species in the galaxy. For the past year, he had been studying human culture, and now he was ready to share what he had learned with everyone. "Fellow beings of the Galactic Council," Zethkar said, his voice ringing like a bell. "Today I present my findings on human mythology and folklore. What I discovered will both amuse and enlighten you." A three-dimensional image appeared above Zethkar's head. It showed a massive human man with bulging muscles lifting a huge boulder over his head. The alien audience made various sounds of interest. "This is Hercules," Zethkar explained. "According to human stories, this man could lift mountains and fight monsters with his bare hands. Humans believe their ancestors possessed such incredible strength." Laughter began to ripple through the crowd. The gastropods, who looked like giant slugs, oozed and bubbled with amusement. The Vexani, insect-like creatures with wings, rubbed their wings together to make their version of giggling. The image changed to show a bearded man holding a hammer, with lightning crackling around him. "This is Thor, from human Norse mythology. They claim he could control thunder and lightning, and that his hammer could level mountains." More laughter filled the hall. Commander Voth of the Drachnary Empire, a lizard-like being covered in dark scales, slammed his fist on his desk. "Impossible! No organic being can control weather patterns with a simple tool." Jake felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. These stories were part of his childhood, tales his grandfather had told him around campfires. Now they were being mocked by beings from across the galaxy. Zethkar continued his presentation. The images showed more human legends. Native American shamans talking to animal spirits, Greek heroes slaying dragons, Celtic warriors drawing power from the earth itself. Each new story brought more laughter from the alien audience. "The most fascinating aspect," Zethkar said, "is that humans are the only known species to create such elaborate fiction about their own capabilities. Every other race in the galaxy tells stories about their actual history. Humans alone seem to need to imagine themselves as far more powerful than they really are." A gastropod representative spoke up, its voice like wet gravel. "Perhaps it is how they deal with being so weak. Their bodies break easily. They live such short lives, and they have no natural weapons or defenses." "Indeed," agreed a Vexani delegate. "They cannot even survive in space without artificial protection. These stories must be their way of pretending they are not so fragile." Zethkar nodded. "My research supports this theory. Human mythology appears to be a psychological coping mechanism. When faced with their obvious physical limitations, they invented stories where their ancestors were gods and heroes." The crystal being gestured to another image, this one showing a human woman with glowing hands, apparently healing someone with just a touch. They even claim their ancestors could heal mortal wounds instantly, communicate with animals, and see the future. Of course, modern humans possess none of these abilities. Jake watched Ambassador Carter shrink in her seat. Her face was red, and she stared down at her hands. Around the hall, aliens were having conversations about how amusing human delusions were. The word pathetic came up several times, translated into various alien languages. "What makes this even more interesting," Zethkar continued, "is how seriously humans once took these stories. They built entire religions around these impossible figures. They went to war defending their mythological beliefs. Some humans today still believe these stories have some basis in reality." A ripple of amused sounds went through the crowd. Jake heard one alien say to another, "How charmingly primitive." "In conclusion," Zethkar said, Human mythology represents the most elaborate fantasy literature ever created by a species about itself. While other races tell stories to preserve their actual history, humans created an entire false history to make themselves feel better about their natural weakness. The alien audience erupted in what could only be called applause, though it sounded like a symphony of clicks, buzzes, roars, and electronic beeps. Jake felt like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Ambassador Carter leaned over to him. "This is worse than I expected," she whispered. "At least it's over," Jake replied. But Zefkar was not finished. "I have prepared a short documentary about human mythological thinking. Perhaps seeing how seriously they take these impossible stories will help us understand their psychology better." The lights dimmed further, and a new series of images began to play. These showed real humans from Earth, people in museums and libraries, talking about their mythological heritage. Jake recognized some of the locations: the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian, libraries in small towns across America. The video showed an elderly man in Texas talking about his grandfather's stories of cowboys who could talk to horses and ride tornadoes. A young woman in Alaska spoke about her grandmother's tales of people who could become wolves. A professor in Boston discussed ancient Greek beliefs about humans who could speak with gods. Notice Zefkar commented how these modern humans still speak of these stories with reverence. Even though they know better, part of them wants to believe their ancestors were capable of miracles. The mockery from the alien audience grew louder. Jake heard one being say, "They actually think they were once powerful." Another replied, "Such self-deception is almost sad." Jake's hands clenched into fists. These were not just stories to him. His own grandmother had told him tales of their family's Irish heritage, of ancestors who could heal with herbs and speak to the spirits of the land. She had always said there was truth in the old ways, even if people had forgotten how to see it. The presentation finally ended, and Zefkar took a bow. The alien audience gave him another round of their various forms of applause. Several beings approached him afterward, congratulating him on his amusing research. "Fascinating work," said a Draknari scientist. "You should publish this as a study in primitive psychology." "I plan to," Zefkar replied. "Humans make such interesting subjects for research into delusional thinking." Jake stood up, his face burning with shame and anger. Ambassador Carter put a hand on his arm. "Let it go, Lieutenant. Getting angry won't help anything. They're treating us like we're some kind of joke," Jake said through gritted teeth. "We knew this might happen," Carter replied. "Human mythology does sound impossible to species that never developed such stories." Around them, aliens continued to discuss the presentation. Jake heard phrases like quaint human fantasies and primitive wish fulfillment in various languages. The universal translators made sure he understood every mocking word. Just as Jake was about to suggest they leave, the lights in the great hall suddenly flashed red. A loud alarm began to sound, the kind that meant serious emergency. The chatter of the alien audience stopped immediately. A voice echoed through the hall, speaking in the neutral language used for council announcements. "Emergency alert. Distress signal received from mining colony Titans. Unknown creature of massive size has emerged from planetary core. Conventional weapons ineffective. Colony population of 50,000 in immediate danger. All available ships requested for emergency response." The hall erupted into organized chaos as representatives from different species began coordinating response efforts. The Draknari immediately offered their most powerful warships. The Andromedans volunteered their advanced science vessels. Within minutes, plans were being made for the largest rescue operation in recent galactic history. Jake looked at Ambassador Carter. For the first time since the presentation began, she was smiling. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she said, "that maybe we'll get a chance to show them what humans are really capable of." Neither of them could have imagined how right she would turn out to be. The fleet that gathered at Titan 7 was the most powerful force the galaxy had ever assembled. Ships from every major species hung in space like deadly flowers, their hulls gleaming with the light of the distant star. The Draknari had brought their flagship Deathbringer, a massive vessel that could crack planets in half. The Andromedans sent their science ship Probability, which could bend reality itself to their will. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the human vessel Endeavor, watching the alien ships prepare for battle. His ship was tiny compared to the others, built for exploration rather than war. The humans had been placed at the back of the formation, where they would be safe from whatever was down on the planet. "Sir," called Lieutenant Amy Johnson from the science station, "I'm getting readings from the surface. Whatever's down there is big." Rodriguez walked over to look at her screen. The numbers made his stomach turn cold. "How big?" "Nearly a kilometer tall, sir. And it's moving." Through the main view screen, they could see Titan V spinning slowly below them. The mining colony had been built on the northern continent, where rich mineral deposits lay close to the surface. Now smoke rose from several locations, and even from space they could see massive gouges in the ground. Admiral Korax of the Drachnary Empire's voice crackled over the communication system. "All ships, prepare for engagement. Whatever this creature is, we will destroy it quickly and save the colonists." The first wave of ships moved toward the planet. Rodriguez watched as the Drachnary vessels entered the atmosphere, their plasma cannons charging with deadly light. The Endeavor's sensors tracked their descent until they disappeared into the smoke and dust below. "Contact!" came a voice over the radio. It was Captain Vex of the Drachnary Assault Force. Visual on the creature. "By the ancient gods, it's huge!" The main screen flickered to life, showing the feed from the Drachnary ships. Rodriguez felt his breath catch in his throat. The creature looked like a massive spider made of living crystal. Its 8 legs were each hundreds of meters long, ending in points sharp enough to cut through steel. Energy flowed through its transparent body like liquid lightning, and its eyes were the size of buildings. "Opening fire!" Captain Vex announced. The Drachnary ships unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons painted the sky with brilliant colors as they poured energy into the creature. The beams hit its crystalline shell and spread across the surface like water on glass. The creature didn't even seem to notice. "No effect," Vex reported, his voice tight with confusion. "All weapons are ineffective." Admiral Korax's voice boomed across all frequencies. "Impossible! Our weapons can destroy battleships." The creature moved with surprising speed for something so large. One of its legs swept through the air, striking a Drachnary destroyer. The ship crumpled like paper and crashed into the ground, leaving a crater half a mile wide. "All units, withdraw," Korax ordered. "Repeat, all units, withdraw." But the Andromedans were already moving in. Their science vessel probability approached the creature with its reality-warping technology active. Space itself seemed to bend around the ship as it prepared to phase the creature out of existence. "Andromedon vessel engaging," came a calm voice from their ship. "Initiating quantum displacement field." Rodriguez watched as the air around the creature began to shimmer. The Andromedans were trying to push the beast into another dimension, a technique that had never failed before. The creature's outline became fuzzy, like a picture going out of focus. For a moment it looked like it might work. Then the creature let out a sound that made every ship in the fleet shake. The quantum field collapsed, and the beast became solid again. If anything, it looked more real than before. "Quantum displacement failed," the Andromedon reported, confusion clear in their voice. "The creature appears to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our technology cannot affect it." Next came the gastropods, with their bioweapons that could eat through any organic material. They released clouds of deadly bacteria that had destroyed entire armies in past wars. The green mist settled over the creature and simply rolled off its crystalline surface like morning dew. The Vexani tried their sonic weapons, devices that could shatter mountains with focused sound waves. The creature absorbed the sonic attacks and seemed to grow brighter, as if the sound was feeding it energy. One by one, every species in the fleet tried their most advanced weapons. The Zephyrians used their gravity weapons to try to crush the creature. The Aquarians hit it with freeze rays that could turn stars into ice. The Ferris Collective fired magnetic pulses that could tear apart metal planets. Nothing worked. Dr. Amy Johnson watched the failed attacks from her station on the Endeavor. She had been studying the creature's energy patterns since the battle began, and something about them seemed familiar. The way the energy flowed through its body reminded her of something, but she couldn't quite place what. "Captain," she called to Rodriguez, "I need to run some tests." Something about this creature is bothering me. Rodriguez nodded, his eyes still fixed on the battle below. Another alien ship had just been swatted out of the sky. Do whatever you need to do, Doctor. Johnson pulled up her files on rare minerals and began comparing them to the creature's energy signature. After a few minutes, she found what she was looking for. The creature's internal energy matched certain crystals found only in the deepest caves on Earth. That's impossible, she whispered to herself. How can an alien creature have the same energy pattern as Earth minerals? She dug deeper into her research, cross-referencing the creature's behavior with everything she knew about Earth geology. The more she studied it, the more connections she found. The creature moved like the legendary beings described in old Earth stories. Its defensive behavior matched the territorial patterns of mythical guardians from human folklore. On the planet's surface, mining foreman Carl Thompson crouched in the deepest tunnel his crew had ever dug. 17 other miners huddled around him, listening to the sounds of battle overhead. Every few minutes, the tunnel would shake as debris rained down from the ceiling. Thompson was a practical man who had spent 30 years digging or out of hostile planets. He didn't believe in fairy tales or ghost stories. But something about the creature's roar reminded him of the stories his grandfather used to tell about the old days in West Virginia, when miners sometimes found things in the deep tunnels that were better left alone. Boss, whispered Pete Martinez, one of the younger miners. What do you think that thing is? Thompson listened to another roar echoing down from above. His grandfather had told him about creatures that lived deep in the earth, guardians that protected things humans weren't meant to disturb. Old stories told to keep children from wandering into dangerous caves. I don't know, Thompson said, but I got a feeling we dug too deep this time. The tunnel shook again, harder than before. Dust fell from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the sound of metal being torn apart. Back in space, Admiral Corax was calling for a full retreat. All ships, fall back to minimum safe distance. Prepare for planetary bombardment. Captain Rodriguez felt sick to his stomach. They're going to destroy the whole planet. With 50,000 people still on it, Johnson added quietly. Rodriguez opened the channel to the Admiral. Sir, request permission to attempt a rescue mission. Corax's reply was sharp. Negative, human vessel. This creature is beyond our capabilities. We must contain it before it spreads to other worlds. But the colonists are already dead, Corax interrupted. No organic life could survive near that creature for long. Johnson suddenly looked up from her console. Captain, I think I know what we're dealing with. Rodriguez turned to her. What do you mean? The energy patterns, the behavior, even the way it looks. This creature matches descriptions from old Earth legends. I think it's some kind of guardian, protecting something we disturbed. That's impossible, Doctor. Earth legends are just stories. Johnson pulled up her data on the main screen. Look at these energy readings. They matched rare crystals found only in Earth's deepest caves. Crystals that show up in dozens of human myths about underground kingdoms and sleeping gods. Rodriguez stared at the data. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe our myths aren't as fictional as everyone thinks. Maybe this creature isn't just some random monster. Maybe it's exactly what human legends have been warning us about for thousands of years. The communication system crackled to life again. Admiral Corax was giving orders to charge the planet, killing weapons. In 10 minutes, Titan 7 would be nothing but floating debris. Johnson stood up from her station. Captain, I need to take a shuttle to the surface. Rodriguez stared at her. Doctor, that's suicide. Not if I'm right about what this creature is. Human mythology might be the key to communicating with it, but I need to get close enough to test my theory. On the main screen, the creature continued to move through the ruins of the mining colony. Every few minutes, it would pause and seem to be searching for something. Johnson was convinced it wasn't randomly destroying everything. It was looking for something specific. Rodriguez looked at his science officer, then at the doomed planet below. The alien fleet was preparing to destroy an entire world because their advanced technology had failed them. Maybe it was time to try something different. The shuttle broke through Titan 7's atmosphere like a falling star. Dr. Amy Johnson gripped her seat as the small craft shook violently, buffeted by winds filled with ash and debris. Beside her, Marine Sergeant Danny Walsh sat calmly, his eyes closed as if he was sleeping. How can you be so relaxed? Johnson asked over the noise of the struggling engines. Walsh opened his eyes and looked at her. My grandmother always said fear makes you stupid. If we're going to survive this, we need to be smart. Johnson nodded and looked out the window. Below them, the mining colony spread out like a broken toy. Massive craters dotted the landscape where the creature's feet had stepped. Buildings lay crushed and twisted, their metal frames bent like wire. Smoke rose from dozens of fires, creating a gray haze that blocked out the sun. There, Johnson pointed to a hill on the edge of the destruction. That's where the deepest mining shaft is located. If there are survivors, they'll be down there. The shuttle touched down with a hard bump. Walsh grabbed his equipment pack and checked his weapon, though both of them knew it would be useless against the creature if they encountered it. Johnson picked up her bag of books and scientific instruments, feeling foolish for bringing old stories to fight a monster. They made their way across the broken ground toward the mining shaft. The air smelled of smoke and something else, something Johnson couldn't identify. It was almost like the smell of a thunderstorm, that electric feeling right before lightning strikes. The entrance to the mining shaft was a black hole in the ground, surrounded by twisted metal and broken machinery. They could hear voices echoing up from deep below. Hello, Johnson called down. Anyone down there? Who's that? Came a rough voice from the darkness. Dr. Amy Johnson, Galactic Survey Corps. We're here to help. A light appeared in the shaft, and a man's face came into view. He was covered in dirt and looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Carl Thompson, mining foreman, he said, climbing up toward them. You picked a hell of a time to visit. How many survivors? Walsh asked. 17, including me. We've been down here since that thing showed up. Every time we try to leave, it comes back to this area like it's looking for something. Johnson felt her heart race. Looking for something. What do you mean? Thompson gestured for them to follow him down into the shaft. Come on, I'll show you, but be quiet. Sound carries down here, and we don't want to attract attention. They descended into the darkness, their helmet lights cutting through the black air. The tunnel was deeper than Johnson had expected, carved out of solid rock and reinforced with steel beams. The walls were covered in strange marks, scratches that looked almost like writing. How deep did you dig? Johnson asked. Deeper than we should have, Thompson replied. We found mineral deposits that didn't match anything in our surveys. The company wanted us to keep going, so we did. That's when we broke through. Broke through to what? Thompson stopped walking and turned to face them. You're not going to believe this. Hell, I don't believe it myself. But we found a chamber down there big as a cathedral, filled with crystals that glow with their own light. And the crystals, they're not just rocks. They're alive. Walsh moved closer. Alive, how? They pulse like a heartbeat. And when we first found them, they were singing. Not making noise, but singing. Harmonies like nothing I've ever heard. Johnson's mind raced. Living crystals that sang. She had read about such things in the old Earth legends. The Celtic stories spoke of crystal caves where the Earth itself could speak to those who knew how to listen. They continued down the tunnel until they reached a large chamber where the other survivors were waiting. Men and women in mining gear sat around small lights, their faces tired and scared. But when they saw Johnson and Walsh, hope flickered in their eyes. Are you here to get us out? Asked Pete Martinez, the young miner. We're working on it, Johnson said. But first, I need to understand what happened here. Mr. Thompson, can you show me this chamber you found? Thompson nodded and led them to a hole in the wall that had been blasted open with mining charges. Beyond it lay a tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. It's about a quarter-mile down, Thompson said. But I should warn you, the creature comes back to this area every few hours, like it's checking on something. As if summoned by his words, the ground above them began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the creature's footsteps. Each step was like thunder, getting closer. It's coming back, whispered Martinez. The footsteps stopped directly above them. Through the steel and rock, they could hear the creature moving around, searching. Its movements were careful, almost gentle, like someone looking for something precious they had lost. Dot Walsh stood up and walked toward the tunnel entrance. I'm going up there. Are you crazy? Thompson grabbed his arm. That thing will kill you. Maybe, Walsh said, but maybe not. My grandmother taught me that some creatures only attack when they're afraid or angry. This one might just be confused. Johnson stared at him. You can't be serious. Walsh looked at her with calm eyes. Doctor, you said human myths might be the key to understanding this creature. My grandmother was half Blackfoot. She taught me the old ways of talking to animals and spirits. If this thing is what you think it is, maybe I can communicate with it. The old ways don't work anymore, Johnson protested. People have forgotten how maybe most people have, Walsh said, but not everyone. He walked to the tunnel entrance and began climbing toward the surface. Johnson and Thompson followed, trying to stop him, but Walsh was already gone. They reached the surface just as Walsh stepped out into the open air. The creature stood 50 meters away, its massive crystalline body catching the light from the fires around the colony. It was even more beautiful and terrifying up close, like a living diamond the size of a building. Walsh walked slowly toward the creature, his hands empty and visible. He removed his helmet and set it on the ground, then continued forward. The creature's huge eyes turned toward him, each one larger than his entire body. Johnson held her breath. Every instinct told her to run, but something made her stay and watch. Walsh stopped about 10 meters from the creature and did something that made no sense at all. He sat down on the ground, cross-legged, and began to speak in a language Johnson didn't recognize. The creature tilted its massive head, listening. Walsh's voice was soft but clear, carrying across the devastated landscape. He wasn't speaking English or any modern language. The words sounded old, older than cities or nations. What's he saying? Thompson whispered. I don't know, Johnson replied. But look at the creature. The massive being had gone completely still. Its eyes were fixed on Walsh, and the energy flowing through its body had changed color, shifting from angry red to something softer, more blue-green. Walsh continued speaking, his voice rising and falling in patterns that sounded almost like music. Johnson realized he was doing something that the galaxy's most advanced species had never tried. He was showing respect. The creature lowered its head until it was almost touching the ground. Walsh reached out slowly and placed his hand on the crystalline surface. The moment they made contact, both of them froze. Johnson watched in amazement as light began to flow between Walsh and the creature. Not painful, burning light, but something warm and gentle. Images flickered in the air around them, pictures that seemed to come from the creature's mind. She saw the mining operation from the creature's perspective. She saw the moment when the miners broke through into the crystal chamber below. She saw the creature's alarm as it realized that something ancient and precious was being disturbed. But most importantly, she saw what the creature was protecting. Deep beneath the ground, in chambers that had been sealed for millions of years, something was sleeping. Not dead, but sleeping. The crystals Thompson had found were not just alive, they were minds, vast and ancient, dreaming of things that had happened before any of the current galactic species existed. The creature was a guardian, just as she had suspected, but it wasn't guarding treasure or territory. It was protecting the sleeping remnants of the species that had once ruled the galaxy, beings so old that their very existence had become legend. Walsh opened his eyes and looked back at Johnson. Doctor, you need to see this. The creature wants to show us something. The massive being lifted its head and began to move, not toward the mining colony, but toward the deepest shaft. Walsh followed, walking beside the creature like a man walking with a trusted friend. Johnson and Thompson hurried to keep up. As they descended into the mines, the creature's body began to glow brighter, providing light for the humans to see. They passed the chamber where the other survivors were hiding, and Johnson could hear their gasps of surprise as the creature moved carefully past them without causing any harm. They reached the bottom of the mine, where the blast hole led to. The crystal chamber. The creature gestured with one of its massive legs, indicating that they should go ahead. Johnson stepped through the opening and gasped. The chamber was exactly as Thompson had described, but now she could see it properly. Crystals covered every surface, pulsing with soft lights. But these weren't just mineral formations. They were shaped like sleeping figures, curled up as if they were resting. In the crystal chamber deep beneath Titan Dr. Amy Johnson watched as Sergeant Danny Walsh placed his hands on one of the sleeping beings. The moment he made contact, the entire chamber filled with light. Not harsh, burning light, but something warm and gentle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Walsh's eyes rolled back, showing only white. His body went rigid, but he didn't fall. Instead, he began to speak in the same ancient language he had used with the creature above, but now his voice carried harmonics that no human throat should be able to make. What's happening to him? Carl Thompson whispered. Johnson watched the energy patterns flowing between Walsh and the crystal being. Her instruments were going crazy, detecting forms of energy that shouldn't exist. I think he's making contact with their minds. Images began to appear in the air around them. Three-dimensional pictures that told a story older than any human civilization. Johnson saw the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago, when the first ones ruled among the stars. They were not conquerors or tyrants, but gardeners who planted the seeds of life on countless worlds. She saw them creating the guardian creatures, massive beings designed to protect the sleeping chambers where the first ones would rest when their work was done. She watched as they encoded special markers into the genetic structure of certain species, markers that would allow communication when the time was right. And she saw the most important truth of all. Humans carried those markers. The visions showed early humans, thousands of years ago, actually communicating with creatures like the guardian above. They drew strength from the earth itself, healed with touch, and spoke with animals. The abilities that human mythology claimed were not fantasies. They were memories passed down through genetic code of what humans had once been capable of. The stories were real, Johnson breathed. All of them were real. Walsh opened his eyes and looked at her, but something had changed. His eyes now held depths that hadn't been there before, as if he was seeing the world through ancient wisdom. "They're dying," he said, his voice carrying strange echoes. "The first ones have been sleeping too long. Their bodies are breaking down. They need to pass on their knowledge and their responsibility before they fade completely." "Responsibility for what?" Thompson asked. Walsh gestured to the sleeping beings around them. "For all of this? The galaxy, the life they planted, the balance they maintained. They were the guardians of everything, and now they need someone to take their place." Johnson felt a chill run through her. "Why us? Why humans?" "Because we're the only species that remembered the old ways," Walsh explained. "Every other race in the galaxy evolved past their mythological connections. They decided that logic and technology were more important than the deeper truths. Only humans kept the stories alive." The crystal being Walsh was touching began to pulse more brightly. More images filled the air, showing the current state of the galaxy. Johnson saw the Galactic Council chamber, where human myths had been mocked just days before. She saw the various alien species, all advanced in their own ways, but all missing something essential. They lost their connection to the deeper forces. Walsh continued. The Drachneri forgot how to commune with the warrior spirits that once guided them. The Andromedans abandoned the dreamwalking that let them see beyond reality. Every species chose pure logic over the mysteries their ancestors understood. But humans didn't, Johnson said, beginning to understand. "We couldn't," Walsh replied. "It's in our DNA. The first ones made sure we would always carry the old knowledge, even if we didn't always believe in it. Every human myth, every legend, every story about heroes and gods, they're all instruction manuals. They tell us how to access abilities that other species have forgotten exist." On the surface above them, the guardian creature let out a call that echoed through the ground. It wasn't the roar of anger they had heard before, but something else, something that sounded almost like singing. "Others are waking up," Walsh said. "There are guardian creatures on planets throughout the galaxy, and they're all responding to what's happening here." Johnson's communicator crackled to life. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through, filled with confusion. "Doctor, we're getting reports from across the galaxy. Massive creatures are emerging from planets that were thought to be barren. The Galactic Council is in a panic. Tell them to hold their fire." Johnson replied quickly. "These creatures aren't hostile. They're trying to preserve something." "Preserve what?" Johnson looked around at the sleeping first ones. the future of everything. She turned back to Walsh, who was still connected to the crystal being. What do they need from us? They need to test us, Walsh said. The genetic markers we carry are just the beginning. We have to prove that we can actually use the abilities they gave us. We have to show that human mythology isn't just stories, but working knowledge. How? Walsh closed his eyes again, and more images appeared. Johnson saw herself standing before the Galactic Council, but not as the embarrassed representative she had been before. In the vision, she was demonstrating abilities that would make the assembled aliens reconsider everything they thought they knew about humans. The first ones will teach us, Walsh explained. But only if we can prove we're worthy. We have to show that we can access the deeper powers without losing our humanity. The crystal being Walsh was touching began to change. Its sleeping form started to glow more brightly, and hairline cracks appeared in its crystalline surface. Johnson realized with alarm that it was preparing to wake up fully. Is that safe? She asked. For them, no, Walsh said sadly. Waking up will use the last of their energy. They'll die in the process, but they'll transfer their knowledge and power to us before they go. Johnson felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. An entire species was about to sacrifice itself to pass on the guardianship of the galaxy to humans. It was more than any one person should have to handle. I need to contact Earth, she said. We're going to need volunteers. She activated her long-range communicator and sent an emergency message to Earth Command. Within hours, responses began coming back. Thousands of humans volunteered to travel to Titan 7, including people whose families had maintained strong connections to their mythological heritage. Lisa Parker, a NASA astronaut whose great-grandmother had been a Celtic storyteller, was among the first to respond. Jim Davis, a Marine colonel who traced his ancestry to Native American medicine men, volunteered immediately. Alina Rodriguez, a doctor whose family had kept alive the healing traditions of ancient Mexico, sent word that she was already preparing to leave Earth. Bub, the most surprising response came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison, the young lieutenant who had sat in humiliated silence during the Galactic Council meeting, requested permission to join the mission. His message was brief. My grandfather always said our Irish ancestors could speak to the spirits of the land. Maybe it's time to find out if he was right. As the volunteers prepared to travel to Titan 7, the first ones in the crystal chamber began their final awakening. One by one, the sleeping beings opened eyes that held the wisdom of millions of years. They looked at the humans standing before them and nodded with something that might have been satisfaction. The nearest being, the one Walsh had been touching, spoke directly into their minds. Its voice was like wind through ancient trees, carrying words in a language older than civilization. We have waited so long for you to remember, it said. The galaxy is full of our children, species we helped to grow and learn. But they forgot the deeper truths in their rush to build machines and conquer space. Only you kept the old stories alive. Johnson found herself able to respond, her thoughts somehow connecting directly to the ancient mind. What happens now? Now you must prove that the stories were more than just entertainment. The first one replied, the abilities your myths describe are real, but they require more than genetic markers to access. They require faith in things that cannot be measured by your instruments. Around the chamber, other first ones were beginning to stir, each one connected to a different human volunteer as they arrived from Earth. Johnson watched as people she had never met successfully made contact with beings older than their entire species. The process wasn't easy. Some humans couldn't make the connection at all, their minds too focused on logic and proof to accept the deeper mysteries, but those who could, those who had maintained some connection to their mythological heritage, found themselves changing in ways they never thought possible. Lieutenant Morrison was among the first to successfully bond with the first one. As the ancient being shared its knowledge with him, Johnson watched him transform from the embarrassed young officer she had known into something more. His eyes began to glow with inner light, and when he moved, it was with a grace and confidence that hadn't been there before. I can feel it, he said, wonder in his voice. Everything my grandfather told me about our ancestors. It's all real. I can sense the life force in the planet, feel the connections between all living things. Dr. Alina Rodriguez arrived and immediately connected with the first one whose specialty had been healing. As the knowledge flowed into her, her hands began to glow with soft light. When she touched one of the injured miners, his wounds closed before their eyes. 3 weeks after the events on Titan 7, the Galactic Council chamber looked exactly the same as before. The curved walls still held thousands of seats for different alien species. The lights still hummed overhead, casting everything in cool, blue light. But something had changed in the air itself, a tension that made every being present shift nervously in their seats. Lieutenant Jake Morrison walked through the main entrance, but he was not the same man who had sat in humiliated silence during Zethkar's presentation. His uniform was the same, but everything else about him had transformed. He moved with quiet confidence, and his eyes held depths that seemed to reflect starlight. Behind him walked Dr. Amy Johnson, Sergeant Danny Walsh, and a dozen other humans who had bonded with the first ones. The alien representatives watched him approach with confusion. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about the events on Titan 7, and the Guardian creatures had stopped their rampage. The mining colony had been rebuilt in days using methods no one understood, and humans were claiming abilities that sounded impossible. Admiral Korax of the Drakneri Empire leaned forward in his seat. Lieutenant Morrison, we understand you have requested this emergency session to address the recent incidents. The council is prepared to listen. Morrison walked to the center of the chamber, the same spot where Zethkar had mocked human mythology weeks before. He looked up at the assembled aliens, representing hundreds of species from across the galaxy. 3 weeks ago, you laughed at our stories, Morrison began. You called them primitive fantasies, the desperate dreams of a weak species trying to pretend they were strong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably, remembering their amusement at the human myths. Today, I'm here to show you that our ancestors never lied, Morrison continued. They just spoke in a language you had forgotten how to understand. Zethkar, the crystalline Andromedon, who had given the original presentation, stood up in his section. Lieutenant, with respect, we have seen no evidence that human mythology represents anything more than creative fiction. Your recent success on Titan 7 was impressive, but it proves nothing about your ancient stories. Morrison nodded. Calmly, you're right. Words alone won't convince you. You need to see. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The knowledge he had inherited from the first ones flowed through him like warm water. Around the chamber, the lights began to dim slightly, as if Morrison was drawing energy from the station itself. When he opened his eyes, they were glowing with soft blue light. The alien audience gasped in various languages. Morrison raised his hand, and a small flame appeared, dancing in his palm. Not a technological flame from some hidden device, but true fire that burned without fuel, controlled by will alone. The Greek stories spoke of Prometheus bringing fire to humanity, Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. They were not metaphors. He closed his fist, and the flame vanished. Then he gestured to Dr. Johnson, who stepped forward. She knelt down and placed her hands on the metal floor of the chamber. Where she touched, plants began to grow. Green shoots pushed up through solid metal, blooming into flowers that should not have been able to exist in the sterile environment of the space station. Our Celtic ancestors told stories of druids who could make forests grow in barren places, Johnson said. They were remembering real abilities. Colonel Jim Davis moved to the center of the chamber. Without warning, he vanished. One moment he was standing next to the others, the next he was gone. The aliens looked around in confusion until Davis reappeared at the far end of the chamber, having moved faster than their eyes could track. Native American legends speak of warriors who could run like the wind, Davis said calmly. Our ancestors were not exaggerating, but it was Sergeant Walsh who provided the most dramatic demonstration. He walked to the center of the chamber and began to speak in the ancient language he had learned from the guardian creature. As his voice rose and fell in patterns that sounded like music, the very air in the chamber began to shimmer. Images appeared above the assembled aliens, three-dimensional pictures that told the story of the first ones. The audience watched in stunned silence as they saw the ancient gardeners planting life throughout the galaxy, creating the guardian creatures and encoding special abilities into the genetic structure of chosen species. Every race in this chamber was touched by the first ones, Walsh said, his voice carrying impossible harmonics. You all had myths and legends once. You all carried the genetic markers that would have allowed you to access these abilities. The images changed, showing the various alien species in their early days. The Draknari had once spoken of warriors who could commune with the spirits of battle. The Andromedans had legends of dreamwalkers who could see beyond reality. Every species had stories similar to human mythology. What happened to your stories? Morrison asked the assembled aliens. Why did you abandon the old knowledge? Admiral Korak stood up slowly. We evolved beyond such primitive thinking. We chose logic and science over superstition, and in doing so, you lost your connection to the deeper forces that govern reality, Walsh replied. You became advanced in technology, but forgotten in wisdom. Zefkar's crystalline form flickered with agitation. Even if these abilities are real, they represent a regression to primitivism. Civilization advances through reason, not through mystical powers. Dr. Alina Rodriguez stepped forward. She had arrived from Earth 2 days earlier and had bonded with one of the last first ones. Her hands glowed with healing light as she spoke. The first ones didn't give us these abilities to make us primitive, she said. They gave them to us so we could serve as guardians of the galaxy. Every species they helped to grow, every planet they seeded with life, all of it needs protection and guidance. She gestured to the images still floating above them. The galaxy isn't an empty place where young species compete for resources. It's a garden that needs tending. The first ones were the gardeners for millions of years. Now they're gone, and someone needs to take their place. Morrison looked around at the alien representatives. They chose us not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we're the only species that remembered the old ways. We kept the stories alive, even when everyone else forgot. Lisa Parker, the NASA astronaut with Celtic heritage, had arrived on the previous ship from Earth. She walked to the center of the chamber and began to sing in ancient Gaelic. As her voice rose, the metal walls of the chamber began to resonate, creating harmonies that touched something deep in every being present. This is what you lost, she sang. This is what you traded away for cold logic and sterile technology. The ability to touch the heart of existence itself. The alien audience sat in stunned silence. Many of them were feeling emotions they thought they had evolved beyond. The Draknari found themselves remembering half-forgotten warrior songs. The Andromedans felt echoes of dream wisdom stirring in their crystalline minds. Morrison raised his voice so everyone could hear. The guardian creatures throughout the galaxy have awakened. They're waiting to see what happens next. If we accept the responsibility the first ones left us, we'll help guide the galaxy toward a future that balances technology with wisdom. And if you refuse, Admiral Korax asked, then the Guardians will protect the galaxy themselves, Walsh answered. They'll make sure that no species can damage the balance the first ones died to preserve. The choice is yours. Commander Voth of the Draknari Empire stood up. His scaled face showed confusion and something that might have been wonder. What you're asking for changes everything. You want us to accept that humans, the youngest and weakest species in the Council, should guide our future. We're not asking to rule anyone, Morrison replied. We're offering to serve as intermediaries between you and the deeper forces that govern reality. Every major decision that affects life in the galaxy would be weighed against the wisdom the first ones left us. Dr. Johnson stepped forward. Think of us as translators. You've forgotten how to read the deeper patterns of existence. We can help you remember, or at least help you understand what those patterns mean. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species were intrigued by the possibility of reconnecting with their lost heritage. Others were skeptical, unwilling to accept that their advanced civilizations needed guidance from humans. But in the end, it was the practical considerations that won the day. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy of guardian creatures, stirring on hundreds of worlds. Ancient sites that had been quiet for millennia were showing signs of activity. The galaxy was changing whether the Council accepted it or not. Admiral Korax called for a vote. all in favor of establishing the Human Guardianship Protocol. The results were closer than Morrison had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 63% of the species voted in favor, including some of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. As the council session ended, Morrison found himself surrounded by alien representatives who wanted to learn more about human mythology. They were beginning to understand that the stories they had mocked contained wisdom their own species had lost. Zethkar approached Morrison as the chamber emptied. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant.